In the quiet village of Umun, under the pale light of a full moon, a mysterious wind swept through the dusty streets. The villagers, who were usually fast asleep by this hour, felt a chill that made them pull their wrappers tighter. But one woman, sitting outside her tiny hut, stared at the moon as though it held the answer to all her troubles. Her name was Akuma, and her whispered wish that night would bring death itself to her doorstep. What could possibly go wrong with just one day of peace? She muttered, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Little did she know, that question would set her life and her village on a path none could ever forget.
Subscribe to my channel.
Akuma lived a hard life, though she had known moments of joy. Her husband, once her greatest source of laughter and comfort, had been taken from her by a fierce storm years ago. Left alone with their young son, Chimdi, Akuma became the heart and soul of their small household. But her strength was fading. Each morning, before the sun painted the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Akuma would rise. She carried heavy bundles of firewood on her head, fetched water from the stream miles away, and worked tirelessly on the dry, unyielding soil of her tiny farm. Despite her efforts, the harvest was always meager. Her evenings were spent at the village market, where even a single yam cost more than she could afford. Chimdi, once a lively boy who laughed at the silliest things, had grown quiet. His once round cheeks were now sunken, and his energy seemed to drain more with each passing day. Akuma's heart broke every time she saw his sad, tired eyes. "Mama," Chimdi whispered one night as she tucked him into bed. "Will things ever get better?" Akuma forced a smile, her fingers brushing through his thinning hair. "Yes, my son, Mama is trying her best. We will be fine." But her voice wavered, betraying the uncertainty in her heart. One particularly harsh evening, after another long day of work with nothing to show for it, Akuma sat outside her hut. The moon was full and bright, casting a silver glow over the village. The stars twinkled as though mocking her struggles. She felt a heaviness in her chest, a weight she could no longer bear. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to the night, "I just need one day to rest, one day without pain, hunger, or sorrow." The wind, which had been soft and gentle, suddenly stopped. The night grew eerily still, and the air turned cold. Akuma shivered, looking around nervously. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. From the shadows of the forest, a figure emerged. It was tall and cloaked in black, its face hidden. The figure's voice was soft but chilling, like the whisper of the wind. "You called for me," it said. Akuma's heart raced as she backed away. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I am Death," the figure replied, stepping closer. Akuma gasped, her knees trembling, but she did not run. Something about the figure's presence, though terrifying, was strangely calming. "You wished for rest," Death continued, "and I have come to grant it." Akuma's fear gave way to confusion. "Rest?" she asked, her voice shaking. Death nodded. "You may borrow me for one day. You will sleep in peace, free from pain, hunger, and sorrow. But be warned, death is not a game. If you borrow me too often, I may not return your life." Akuma hesitated. Her mind raced with questions. Could she really trust this figure? But the thought of one day of peace was too tempting to resist. "Just one day," she whispered. "I'll take it." Death raised a shadowy hand and gently touched her forehead. The world around Akuma faded into darkness as her body crumpled to the ground. The next morning, Chimdi woke to find his mother lying still on the floor. "Mama!" he cried, shaking her. But she did not move. Panic gripped his little heart, and he ran out of the hut shouting, "Help! My mama won't wake up!" Villagers rushed to Akuma's hut, their faces pale with worry. They found her lifeless body and began whispering among themselves. "She's gone," one elder said solemnly. But the village's native doctor, a wise man with a deep understanding of the unseen world, arrived and inspected Akuma's body. He shook his head and said, "Her spirit is not far. We must wait until tomorrow." The villagers, though puzzled, trusted his wisdom. They left Akuma's body in her hut and prayed for her soul. When the sun rose the next morning, Akuma gasped for air and opened her eyes. The villagers screamed in amazement. "She's back!" they cried. Chimdi threw his arms around his mother, sobbing with relief. "Mama, I thought you were gone forever." Akuma held him tightly, her heart filled with gratitude. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She had borrowed death and returned to life.
Subscribe to my channel.
At first, Akuma felt a deep sense of relief. The rest she had experienced in death was unlike anything she had ever known. Quiet, peaceful, and free of the endless weight of her struggles. But as the days returned to their usual harshness, her memories of that peace grew stronger. The hunger, the exhaustion, the constant worry, it all became unbearable once more. One night, sitting under the same moonlit sky, she found herself whispering the words again. "Death, I call you. Let me borrow your peace for a few days." The air turned cold, and the familiar shadow appeared at the edge of the forest. Death stepped forward, its presence both terrifying and comforting. "You returned so soon," Death said, its voice soft but laced with warning. Akuma hesitated. "Life is too hard," she murmured. "Just a few days this time. I need more rest." Death tilted its head, as though considering her request. "3 days," it said finally. "But remember, the more you borrow, the closer you come to losing your life forever." Akuma nodded, ignoring the warning. She had already decided. 3 days, she repeated. This time, before she lay down, Akuma told Chimdi she would be visiting a faraway farm deep in the forest to look for food. She left him with a kind neighbor, promising to return soon. She found a soft patch of grass under a tree and lay down, whispering, "I am ready." Death's shadowy hand touched her forehead, and her soul slipped into silence. For 3 days, Akuma's body remained still beneath the tree. The villagers believed her story about traveling to the farm, but Chimdi worried endlessly. "Mama always comes back," he told himself, though doubt gnawed at his heart. On the 4th morning, Akuma's soul returned, and she woke with a deep breath. She stretched her arms, feeling lighter and calmer than she had in years. She returned to the village with renewed energy, hugging Chimdi tightly. "You were gone for so long, Mama," he said, tears streaming down his face. Akuma smiled, brushing his tears away. "I'm here now, my son. Mama will always come back." The villagers noticed Akuma's disappearances becoming more frequent. Though she always returned with a story about her travels, some began to whisper that something unusual was happening. Akuma ignored their suspicions. Her secret was hers alone to keep. As time went on, Akuma became bolder. What started as borrowing death for 1 day turned into 3, then a week. Each time, she ventured deeper into the forest, far from the prying eyes of the villagers. She feared they might one day try to bury her before she could return. Chimdi grew increasingly worried about his mother's absences. One evening, as she prepared to leave again, he clung to her arm. "Mama, why do you always go away?" he asked, his voice trembling. Akuma knelt down, stroking his hair. "I go to find food for us, my son. Don't worry, Mama always comes back." But Chimdi wasn't convinced. Tears welled up in his eyes as he watched her leave. "What if one day you don't come back?" he whispered to himself. Akuma tried to push away the guilt. She told herself that borrowing death was the only way she could find the strength to keep going, for Chimdi's sake. One day, life's burdens became too heavy for her to bear. She decided to borrow death for 2 whole weeks. "This will be the longest rest I've ever had," she thought as she walked deeper into the forest. She found a secluded spot beneath an ancient tree, its roots twisted like the fingers of an old storyteller. Lying down, she whispered, "Death, I am ready." Death appeared, its shadow looming over her. 2 weeks is a long time, it said, its tone grave. Akuma closed her eyes. "I need this," she said softly. Death's touch was cold and her soul drifted away. Back in the village, the days passed slowly. Chimdi waited by the door each day, hoping to see his mother's familiar figure walking toward their hut. but she did not return. "She's probably looking for more food," the neighbors told him, trying to ease his worry. But deep down, Chimdi felt something was terribly wrong. After 2 weeks, Akuma's soul began its journey back. But this time, something was different. The return was slower, heavier, as though death itself hesitated to let her go. The villagers, now deeply concerned, formed a search party. They combed the forest, calling Akuma's name. After hours of searching, they found her body lying beneath the ancient tree. She looked peaceful, as though she were simply asleep. But when they tried to wake her, she did not stir. "She's still," one villager said nervously. Another suggested taking her to the native doctor. "He will know what to do." The villagers carried Akuma's body back to the village. Chimdi ran to them, tears streaming down his face. "Mama!" he cried, shaking her hand. But she did not move. The native doctor examined her closely, his face dark with concern. He placed his hand on her forehead and closed his eyes. After a long silence, he spoke. "Her spirit is gone," he said gravely. "Death has taken her for good." The villagers gasped, their hearts heavy with grief. "She borrowed death too many times," the native doctor explained. "This time, death refused to return her life."
Subscribe to my channel.
The village was plunged into mourning. Akuma's story, once whispered in suspicion, was now laid bare. The native doctor explained how she had borrowed death to escape her pain and sorrow, but at the cost of her life. "She wished for peace," he said, his voice filled with both sadness and wisdom. "But she forgot that even in the hardest times, life carries hope. By running from her struggles, she left behind her responsibilities, and now she has paid the ultimate price." Chimdi, who had listened quietly, collapsed to his knees. "It's my fault," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "Mama worked so hard because of me. She was tired because of me." A kind woman from the village, Mama Nkechi, knelt beside him and wrapped him in her arms. "No, my child," she said softly. "Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. She fought to stay alive for you, but the weight of her struggles became too much. This is not your fault." Chimdi nodded through his tears, but the guilt clung to him like a shadow. The villagers prepared Akuma's body for burial, laying her to rest under the ancient tree where she had last borrowed death. On the day of her burial, the entire village gathered. The native doctor stood before them, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Let Akuma's story be a lesson to us all," he began. "Life is full of struggles, but death is not the answer. When we are alive, there is hope. Things can change in just one day, but in death, there are no second chances." The villagers nodded, their faces solemn. Many of them reflected on their own hardships, realizing they had taken life for granted. From that day forward, they vowed to support one another. "If a family is hungry, we will share our food," one elder declared. "If someone is overwhelmed, we will help them carry their burdens," another added. The village became a community where no one struggled alone. Kindness and unity became their greatest strengths, and they ensured that no one else would feel the need to borrow death. Chimdi was taken in by Mom Nkechi, who treated him as her own son. She cooked for him, told him stories, and did her best to bring light back into his life. But no matter how much she loved him, Chimdi couldn't stop missing his mother. Each week, he visited Akuma's grave under the ancient tree. He brought flowers he had picked from the fields and sat by her resting place, speaking as though she could hear him. "Mama, I'm doing well," he would say, his voice trembling. "Mama Nkechi is kind, but I miss you so much. I'll make you proud, I promise." The villagers often saw him there and felt both sorrow and pride for the boy who carried his mother's love in his heart. One day, the native doctor gathered the children of the village under the same tree where Akuma was buried. He told them her story, simplifying it so their young minds could understand. Akuma borrowed death to escape her pain, he explained. But she forgot that even in the darkest times, life holds hope. If she had asked for help or waited just a little longer, maybe things would have turned around for her. The children listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder. "What does Akuma's story teach us?" the native doctor asked. A small boy raised his hand and said, "That we shouldn't give up." The native doctor smiled and nodded. "Yes, that's right. Life is hard sometimes, but when we help each other, the pain becomes lighter. And remember, even if today is bad, tomorrow could be the day your life changes for the better. Never forget the gift of being alive." The children clapped and cheered, their young hearts taking the lesson to heart. As years passed, Akuma's story became part of the village's history. Elders told it during gatherings, and it was written down in books so that future generations could learn from her choices. People who faced tough times often thought of Akuma and found strength to keep going. And so, the story of Akuma, the woman who had borrowed death, became a timeless reminder of the value of life. It was passed down through generations, inspiring countless hearts to face their struggles with courage and hope.
Subscribe to my channel.